Morning Light by FallenBrie. Kunikita is in a particular kind of mood. The kind that only Dazai himself can conjure up with enough lies and distractions to put his schedule off by at least 10 whole minutes. Or that's the gist of the issue Atsushi picks up while only half listening to their argument from the back seat. He's never been to this part of Yokohama before, and the glittering shop windows of the luxury district are much more interesting than the two of them rehashing the same old fight. He's explored quite a bit of the city, but even the high-fashion roads Yosuno drags him to pale in comparison to the glittering white tiled walkways and outfits of passers-by even Atsushi can see are incredibly expensive. Everywhere else in the city, people rush about, bumping shoulders with heads firmly cast down in order to move as quickly as possible. Here, though, the people seem almost stagnant, casually walking without the pressure of anywhere to be. The entire district screams with wealth and surplus, and the innermost orphan inside of him can't help but gawk at the display. "Shiryoku!" Dazai announces, interrupting his thoughts. "Man, this place never changes. Did I ever tell you I've been kicked out of most of the bars around here? I wonder if a lifetime ban is still in effect if there's a change in ownership." "You hung out around here?" Atsushi asks curiously, leaning forward to rest his arm on the back of the passenger seat. "Sure did. Most of my contacts were local, and like the gentleman I am, I always came to them." "You mean you wanted expensive booze and didn't want to pay for it, so you hung around like a bottom feeder until someone threw you scraps," Kunikita says dryly, eyes never leaving the road. Dazai grins and pinches Kunikita's cheek. "It's almost like you were there." Atsushi likes his job, maybe even loves it, depends on the day and who's currently haunting him. But even he gets sick of running around shipping docks and back alleys. Shiryoku has them scouting out a train line, and its plush warehouse filled with luxury imports. And for once, he's bouncing with excitement to get to snoop around. "Remember, we're after the set of slab plates, and that's it," Kunikita reminds them sternly, as they walk through the towering aisles of cargo boxes with "fragile" written on them in nearly every language stamped across them. "We're surrounded by perhaps more wealth than the rest of the city combined, and we're spending our time searching for big rocks. Great," Dazai mourns loudly, just to irritate his partner. But his eyes are bright and focused as he takes in the room, which Atsushi knows means he's serious. "What exactly are the slabs for?" he asks, stepping onto one of the pallets to dig through the open boxes currently being repackaged. He'd gotten caught up in an errand with Junichiro that morning and had missed the briefing, Kunikita having picked him up from the post office on their way here. There are endless rumors about their potential, though all sources agree that they are incredibly powerful and would be disastrous if they fell into the wrong hands. Atsushi blinks expectantly, knowing Kunikita is purposely being vague for suspense. The man sighs and adjusts his glasses before busying himself, scanning over the next shelf. Several recent disappearances seem to suggest it can manipulate time. "Time? As in time travel?" he gapes. "I thought that kind of stuff was impossible." "You can transform into a tiger and grow back your limbs, Atsushi. I'd be careful what I label as impossible if I were you." Dazai hums from where he's inspecting his own reflection in a large jewel-encrusted mirror. "Does that mean you really believe it, then? That this thing can control time?" he asks, excitement bubbling in his chest. For once, they actually get to do a cool mission instead of the usual death and destruction. "It'd be useful if we could actually examine it, which I will again remind you is what we're here for, Dazai," Kunikita shouts, stomping across the row to try and drag his partner away from his own reflection. Atsushi grins as he moves deeper into the warehouse to check the next aisle. Not only do they get a cool location, but a cool item to recover too. It almost feels like an adventure novel. He considers the image of Dazai and Kunikita with matching fedoras and whips, which is distracting enough he almost misses the crate hanging halfway off the shelf. He narrowly avoids losing an ankle against the unforgiving wood. The crate looking hastily repackaged, as if someone, was caught halfway through digging around the contents and didn't have time to properly push it back onto the shelf. It's a dark black color, standing out against the pale wood crates surrounding it. It's also the perfect size for a pair of time travel tablets, if he'd had to guess, which he really shouldn't. He has zero frame of references for any sort of tablet, especially magical ones. Still, he can't help but grin in excitement as he pulls back the thick tarp covering the crate. Instead of tablets, he comes face to face with a pair of dark brown eyes. Atsushi shouts, or at least tries to. A small but strangely strong hand immediately clamps over his mouth before he can make a sound. Another is grabbing his shoulder to keep him from jumping back. "Shh," the boy whispers, face so close to his own he can feel the warmth against his cheek. "They'll be here soon." He's about the same size as Kyoka, but his eyes seem older, ancient even. They hold a weight Atsushi's only ever seen in the president, and combined with the strength in his grip, he isn't liking what this is adding up to. "Who will be?" He tries to ask around the hand on his mouth, but it comes out garbled and broken. "You will soon see. You must protect the tablet at all costs." The kid knows about the slabs? He cranes his head down to try to see into the crate, but the boy shakes his shoulder impatiently. "We have no time for this. You must go back to your comrades. Your only priority is to protect the tablet. Do you understand?" He most definitely does not understand. Does this kid want him to lie to the agency about where the slabs are? Technically, it isn't like he actually saw them, but still. Why the hell would he do that? And why, even, is this kid hiding out in a warehouse crate to begin with? His confusion must show on his face because the boy sighs, still so close, and those eyes so old as they seem to stare straight into Atsushi's soul. "It may take you several attempts, but don't worry, you shall succeed." Succeed with what? What did this kid even want from him? If he could just get Kunikita and Dazai over here, then he's sure they'd be able to convince him they didn't mean any harm. Maybe even get him back to his family or wherever the hell he'd wandered off from. He doesn't even get a chance to explain before the brown eyes flash gold. "Ability," the boy whispers. "Death comes for the Archbishop." His body burns as the ability takes hold, and his inner tiger roars somewhere deep inside his head. He can feel the coil of restraints around his wrists, then jerks as his arms are slammed down to the floor against his will. He can't see, he can't breathe. All he can do is feel as his body is tied down to the ground, and then it's gone. Atsushi gasps as he stumbles to his feet, rubbing at the shadow pane of restraints on his wrists, but there are no cuffs, nothing holding him down. The boy has also disappeared. "Seriously, all that just so you could run off?" he grumbles under his breath. But he's not hurt, and the crate is still in the middle of the floor. He pushes the rest of the tarp off, and instead of brown eyes, he finds two large stone slabs, side by side in shock foam packaging. He can just make out the engraving of words in a foreign language, and he can't help but reach out and trace over the cool stone. Nothing happens. Not really magic, then. He frowns, feeling nothing but rock underneath his hand. Still, someone had obviously requested these be found if the agency was assigned to the job, and that kid sure did seem concerned with them. He shrugs and starts to head back to where he'd left the others, figuring that they'd have a much better idea of what to make of the stray kid. Hopefully, he isn't in any trouble, though he can't exactly think of a lot of positive reasons a kid would be hanging around a place like this. Still, he knows what it's like to be hungry and alone, hiding out in the first safe place he can squirm his way into. He'd just like to make sure the kid had somewhere else to run back to. He turns the corner back into the main aisle where he left Dazai and Kunikita, but instead of his mentors arguing, he's greeted by 12 armed men poking around crates with their guns. A woman in a neatly pressed white kimono stands by the doors, a delicate fan in one perfectly manicured hand. "It's here. Keep looking," she orders. Her eyes flick his way, and he prepares for a fight, power rushing to his arm as his fingers lengthen into claws, but before he can leap, he's yanked backwards behind a large crate. Now, Atsushi, you weren't seriously planning on fighting an entire mysterious group of people you know nothing about, were you? Daze asks him with a razor-sharp smile. Because Kunikita would definitely be disappointed. I would, Kunikita confirms, crouched down next to them as he spies on said group over the crate. But I know you weren't doing that, because that would mean you've listened to absolutely nothing I've attempted to teach you. I wasn't, he flushes, letting Daze push him down to sit on the cold concrete next to him. Who even are those guys? No idea, but they're very armed and seem to be after the same exact thing we arrived here for. Safe to say we're not working for the same side. They're after the slabs? He frowns, before his eyes widen in realization. Shit, I found them, but the crate is just sitting out in the open. Over here! A voice booms through the warehouse, and his words trail off. He couldn't even put the lid back on the crate. He might as well have practically handed the slabs over to these people. They watch as 3 of the group return carrying the black crate, setting it down with an echoing thunk in the middle of the floor. Looks like we made it just in time, the woman coos as she inspects the contents, reaching down to trace a hand over the slab that, just a few minutes ago, Atsushi had held. God, he's such an idiot. How can he even work for a detective agency if he can't even keep some rocks from being stolen? This isn't good. If they take the slabs, they're as good as gone. Groups like this shift stolen goods faster than we'd ever be able to keep up with, and leave no trail. Daze comments, eyes never leaving the woman. Atsushi swallows around the thickness in his throat, hands clenching in the need to try and fix the situation he set them up in. He's the reason the mission is failing. If he'd just grabbed the slabs, they'd be able to sneak out of here, but instead he's ruined the entire operation. We'll need to act fast then, Kunikita agrees. You, put that mouth of yours to good use and distract them while I come up from behind. Atsushi doesn't hear the rest because the barrel of a gun is now digging into his scalp. One glance at his companions finds them in a similar situation. Despite witnessing previous encounters of Daze and guns, the man doesn't look nearly as pleased, eyes locked on the weapons pressed against his and Kunikita's skulls in distaste. Up, a deep voice from behind him demands. He glances at Daze and Kunikita, who nod their confirmation, and he obediently stands, followed quickly by the other 2 as they're escorted into the entryway. I thought we managed to beat you here, but perhaps that was a bit presumptuous of me. After all, I've heard quite the stories of the feats you people pull at that armed detective agency. The woman smiles, all teeth as she delicately fans her face. You have us at a disadvantage, Daze says pleasantly. In more ways than one. Perhaps the guns are a bit overkill, but like I said, I'd prefer not to take any risks when it comes to you people. The gun at the back of his head presses in pointedly, making him wince. And who do you represent? Kunikita asks. The woman's fan closes with a sharp crack against her palm. I don't believe that's necessary. We have what we want, and we'll be leaving. Don't try and follow us. You won't like what happens. Now, Daze shouts. A flash grenade lighting up the warehouse. Before he can so much as inhale, Kunikita's hand is pushing him down, away from the guns as they roll towards the closest crate for cover. Daze is already there, picking off the 2 closest guards with bullets to the shoulder. As the group recovers from the flash. Kid, you think you can make it to the doors? Kunikita asks, grabbing his notebook. Daze and I will make an opening. You grab the slabs and run. But what about... Daze laughs, twirling his gun before taking out 2 more of the group's men. We need the goods out of here before we can leave. You do your job. You're helping us out of here sooner. Atsushi narrows his eyes and nods seriously. Right, I got this. 3 flash grenades make an appearance this time. Kunikita overcompensating for the group, most likely expecting a secondary attack, and Atsushi takes the opening. Bullets zing over his shoulders, but he trusts them. He trusts these 2 with his life several times over, and doesn't so much as wince as he vaults the crate and bolts over for the slabs in the middle of the room. Legs already transformed for the boost of speed. They're heavy. Shit. Really heavy. He wastes precious seconds transforming his arms, but then he has them, both slabs against his chest as he makes a break for the exit, the door almost in reach. A brutal force crashes into him, sending him flying against the storage shelves. The sickening crack of stones splitting against the concrete rings louder than the snap of his wrist as the shock sends his body back into human form. Kid! Atsushi! The woman is standing in front of him, white kimono looking shifting to black as it billows around her feet. What kind of ability? You idiot! She hisses, and Atsushi can only agree. Both stone slabs split in two across the floor. Useless. Why is he so useless? I will make you regret this day, she sneers, the kimono flickering like growing flames as it expands toward him, thick and unforgiving, and he can't help but stare as it rises up, only to crash down. Shiryoku! He gasps, bolting up in his seat. Dazai and Kunikita stare back at him, the car idling at a red light. Kid, Kunikita prompts. What? Atsushi stares back, wide-eyed. I believe that's my line. Dazai raises an eyebrow. You okay? No, what? Again, we're the ones asking you what's going on. No, we were at the warehouse. We were attacked. Attacked? Dazai hums in interest. Kunikita rolling his eyes at his partner and turning back to the road as the light flashes green. The white walkways and expensive clothes of Shiryoku reflect back at him from the window just as glittering as they had been a few hours ago. We were cornered and I tried to get the slabs out, but then that woman, His eyes widen and he looks down at his arm, the wrist looking normal and very much not broken like the snapping sound would have suggested. His healing ability is fast, but even it usually takes some time with broken bones if he's not fully transformed. Man, Atsushi, you must be seriously loving the job if you're already dreaming about work. Dazai laughs and pats his shoulder lightly. Come on, kid. No one gets the drop on us. People have, and do, just seconds ago in fact, but Atsushi has no proof other than his racing heart and has no choice but to go slack against the seat. What the hell just happened? He glances back down at his wrist. He knows he heard a snap, felt the telltale weakness as his hand went limp in response, but his fingers flex up pain-free. He grits his teeth in frustration and fumbles with the cuff on his sleeve, desperate to see some sign of swelling or injury or anything. His breath catches in his throat, eyes locked on the purpling bruise on his skin. Not swollen and ugly from a broken bone, but delicate and wrapped perfectly around the smallest part of his wrist. His mind flashes back to the burning of the boy's ability, the feeling of his arms being dragged to the ground by some unknown force, wrists bound tightly, hard enough to bruise. If Dazai and Kunikita notice his lack of interest in the background of the case, they don't mention it, too caught up in their own argument without him to chime in with questions when they pull up to the warehouse. He doesn't care, though. He has bruises on both wrists from an ability he doesn't understand and is somehow repeating the past 2 hours only he can remember. He manages to hold out until Kunikita walks over to scold Dazai for not staying on track to make a break for the crate, not wanting to draw too much attention to how insane he feels right now. He has no idea what's actually going on, and admitting it out loud seems just a touch too close to making the insanity a reality. He'd also have to admit how horribly he'd failed their mission, and maybe a small part of him is grateful that the other two don't remember his constant mistakes. He'd been with the agency for almost a year now, and still has yet to properly prove himself. He knows they like him well enough, and he's been able to help out on some of the more city-destroying disasters, but deep down, he knows that he's never that far away from a move that might send him right back onto the street. It would kill him, not having Dazai's ridiculous quips and proud grins looking back at him during a case, or Kunikita's firm teaching when he takes on a new task, and the big warm hand that always seems to rest on his back after a close call. Yoshino dragging him along for her latest hole-in-the-wall find. Junichiro and Naomi teaching him how to cook his very own ochazuke. Kenji showing him around the city, Rampo silently dropping a bag of candy on his desk on his birthday. Kyoka smiling over at him every day from her own work desk. No, he will not disappoint them. He'll do whatever it takes to give these people just even a sliver of care and kindness that they've shown him this past year. He loves them and will protect them and the agency to death, even if he's just an average coworker in their eyes. He pushes himself faster, not willing to waste any more time as he heads for the black crate. It's sticking out from the shelf the same as it was before, the tarp half hanging off the side. He's prepared this time, though, and yanks the tarp off, taking a step backward out of reach in case the boy tries to grab him again. Nothing happens. Hello? He frowns, waiting a moment, but when no mysterious boy appears, he sighs and leans over the side of the crate. He thinks maybe that kid just wants to jump out at him, but instead of a curled-up child ready to spring, there's only 2 stone slabs at the bottom of the crate. What? He stares for several long moments. Everything had been the same up until now. The car, the warehouse, and even the crate was exactly how he found it the first time. Where the hell was the kid? He tries to think back, but even his memory is blurry. He'd been a bit too focused on those brown eyes, and the hand gripping his shoulder, to notice what he even looked like beyond a cursory glance. Shit! He kicks the crate lightly. No way is he gonna risk those slabs again. What the hell was he supposed to do now? He's been marked by some power he doesn't understand, and now the user somehow disappeared, despite everything in this weird world telling him that he should be right here. Your only priority is to protect the tablet, he swears, the words rushing through his head so violently it leaves it aching. Right, the boy had given him a mission. Lucky for them both, Atsushi is planning on never letting those things anywhere near that asshole group again. He leans down, fingers centimeters away from touching the stone, when he remembers his original excitement about the artifact and Kunikita's comment on the rumors swirling around it. Time travel. He hesitates for a moment longer before shaking his head with a laugh. Yeah, right. Whatever was going on had to do with the ability user, not some magic stone. He makes quick work of the slabs, tucking both safely under his transformed arms, and kicks the crate back onto the shelf line with the others. Hopefully, that'll buy them a bit more time. He makes it back to the middle of the warehouse, just in time to see Dazai and Kunikita ducking behind a large crate, and quickly joins them, silently kneeling down to watch as the mysterious group searches. We were just about to get worried. Dazai grins without so much as glancing at him, and Atsushi can't help but grin back. This time won't be like before. He'll make them proud. I don't recognize that woman, and they're not wearing any recognizable insignia. Any idea what group they're from? Kunikita asks. Dazai shakes his head. No clue. They're most likely antique smugglers, though. I'm sure they'll have a buyer lined up, so we're going to need to work fast. Guys, he interrupts, drawing both their gazes to him. He shrugs his shoulders, a tablet tucked under each arm. There's a lengthy pause. Hell yes, Atsushi. Quiet, you idiot. Kid, how did you even... Never mind. We'll talk about it in the car. A warm, heavy hand pressed against his back. Great work. Atsushi beams. The ride back to the agency is filled with Kunikita quizzing him on how exactly he managed to find the slab so fast, and Dazai waxing poetic about the gorgeous woman in the white kimono, and how, if they'd have the chance to fight, he could have definitely convinced her into a double suicide. She has that look, Atsushi! Atsushi just laughs, the slabs tucked carefully in the trunk, and he can almost chalk the first version of events up as a dream, and the bruises on his wrists as no more than a strange injury. Almost. They arrive back to the agency, and Kunikita explains that the slabs will be returning to their rightful owner after being stolen over a decade ago. The owner heard a tip that they were being moved and called in a favor with the president, he explains, finger a blur as he quickly fills in the needed paperwork for the case. That's good. I'm glad they're going back to where they belong, Atsushi murmurs, thinking back to the brown-eyed boy. How did he fit into this? Is the owner local? No, Mexican, I believe. Huh. He chews his lip. Considering distant relatives who might be local to the area, or even separated during a school trip, but then Kenji's calling for his help filling a case, and the day passes in a bit of a blur. I'll look into that kid tomorrow, is his last thought as he curled up on his futon before sleep overtakes him. Shiryoku! Dazai's shout wakes him up, but he doesn't have the time to get his bearings. Tumbling sideways in his seat from the jolt of going abruptly from laying down to upright. Man, this place never changes. Did I ever tell you I've been kicked out of most of the bars around here? I wonder if a lifetime ban is still in effect if there's a change in ownership. He can just make out the reflection of white-tiled walkways off the shop windows he can see from the floor of the car. Atsushi, are you even listening? God. I remember a time when everyone was dying to know what I got up to in my old position. And now I'm literally boring Atsushi to sleep in the footwell, Dazai whines. Seatbelt, Atsushi, Kunikita scolds. It's not safe to be crawling around the back while we're driving. Atsushi stares up at the tan ceiling of the car and wonders why these things always seems to happen to him. They get to the warehouse and he completely ignores any attempt at being subtle, making a beeline for the slabs before Dazai and Kunikita even make it to the first shelf. He'd done what the ability user had asked. He'd kept the slabs protected and brought them back to the agency safe and sound. Kunikita had even said they were going back to the original owner. Unless, of course, the boy meant they weren't supposed to leave the warehouse at all, which definitely is going to be a conflict of interest considering the group is trying to steal them, and the fact Kunikita said they were going to be shipped out on the train tomorrow. A growl works his way out of his mouth in frustration, and his muscles push harder, working out some of the tension he feels as he runs. Of course the crate isn't particularly far, and the amount of momentum he's built up works against him as he tries to stop, sending him crashing into the opposite shelf in a heap of shattered glass. He vaguely remembers a stack of hand-printed porcelain serving trays nearby from the previous attempts. He'd feel worse if it was like whatever he'd broke wasn't going to magically put itself back together again when he went to sleep. He sits up with a wince, looking down at himself to find a long shard of glass shallowly pierced through his side. Seriously? He groans. It's nothing more than an inconvenience compared to some of his other injuries, but it still hurts, and from the slow stitching of the skin back together, it'll take a bit to heal. His wrists throb. He frowns, pushing up his sleeves to check them over. Dumb bruises still very much there, but the skin is aching. He definitely didn't land on his hands, so what the hell could be causing that? He gets an uneasy feeling as he stares at the delicate line of bruising, the dull ache slowly strengthening into a painful throb. He's been sitting here for far too long. He can hear the woman's thugs making their way through the warehouse aisles nearby, and soon it'll be too late for him to sneak away to join Dazai and Kunikita without getting caught. Checking aisle 12. He hears the crackle of an earpiece way too close, and he whips his head around to face the gun that's surely going to be pointed at his face. Shiryoku! Dazai's voice greets him instead, the soft cushion of Kunikita's leather seats replacing the shattered glass underneath him. He drops his head down between his knees and tries not to scream. Sleeping and injuries, what else could reset the day? Or rather, half-day. He always ends up back in the car on his way to the warehouse. He'd have to be extra careful now. He darts into the warehouse as soon as they arrive, but doesn't sprint. Having learned that lesson on trying to rush, he doesn't particularly want to see how many times he can cheat death in this world. His only priority right now is keeping the slabs safe, and getting that gifted kid to let him out of here for a job well done. He guesses, because he doesn't exactly have a whole lot to go on, and it's not like the kid is showing up to offer any hints. Protect the slabs, he murmurs to himself as he turns the corner and comes face to face with the black crate, which is what he does, over and over again. He delivers the slabs directly to the president himself. Repeat. He sits with the slabs all night at the agency office, but as soon as the clock hit midnight, repeat. He hides the slabs in different boxes to try to stop the mysterious group from finding them. repeat. He even has Dazai rub his hands all over them just in case, and still repeat. He's lost count of his attempts when he decides the whole thing might just be a little out of his league. He doesn't know if waking up on the same day counts as some sort of rest, but he hasn't actually slept since this started. And despite his body not being tired, he still feels like he's breaking around the edges from exhaustion. That makes it a little easier to jump out of the car when the world next resets. It's nothing nearly as dramatic as it feels. Kunikita always sitting at the red light when he opens his eyes at what he now calls the beginning of the day. It's 3 in the afternoon. But despite how many times he's done this, he's never differentiated from the path until they arrive at the warehouse. Doing something different now feels a bit like sacrilege. He can hear Kunikita and Dazai both calling after him, no doubt shocked by him making a break for it mid-conversation, and the thought makes him laugh as he blends himself into the crowd. From the few odd stares he receives, he doubts it sounds as sane as he'd like to believe. There's only one person he wants to talk to, and he has the phone ringing against his ear as he ducks in between 2 shops and leans against the brick wall between the dumpsters. What? Atsushi pulls in a shaky breath. Hey, Rampo, are you? Yes, I'm in the middle of the case of the stolen Kit Kat bag that was just purchased this morning. You, haven't solved it yet? Of course I have. Did you forget who you're talking to? I'm now considering the best course of revenge. Tell me, Atsushi, which would you least like to find in your desk drawer? Slugs or centipedes? Rampo, I kind of need your... Trick question? Of course it would be the slugs for you. You wince at them every time you spot them on the sidewalk, though I believe generally the consensus in the office would fall under the centipede. Rampo. Atsushi's voice breaks against his will, and he does his best to keep it together. He isn't trying to think of Rampo as his last hope, but from the way his fingers are nearly indenting the plastic of the phone, they obviously don't get the memo. There must be something that sneaks past in his tone because the usual ruffling of Rampo's multitasking stops. There's a cafe across the street from you. I'll be there in half an hour. He's not exactly sure where to start, but like most conversations with Rampo, an introduction is hardly ever needed. The man takes one look at him from the doorway of the cafe before nearly skipping over to the table Atsushi had picked out near the back corner. What the hell did you get mixed up in? Does he really look that bad? This afternoon, you left to do a post office run with Junichiro, looking moderately refreshed from a lunch with Kenji. Those bags under your eyes are particularly deep, considering they were non-existent not even 2 hours ago. He reaches out a hand and takes Atsushi's, pushing up the sleeve to show the coiled bruising around his wrists, still just as dark as when he received them. These, though, are particularly interesting. They are? He asks, and something sounding suspiciously like hope is in his tone. Has Rampo seen this ability before? Yes, handcuffs don't bruise like this. I've never seen anything that could make a mark perfectly round with the exact amount of pressure applied to the entire wrist to create that uniform shade of purple. That means this was most likely caused by an ability. That, combined with the exhaustion, he lets go of Atsushi's hand and leans back in his chair, looking him over with a frown. You've been caught in some sort of time displacement. Atsushi gapes, looking down at his wrists before back up at Rampo. He knows the man is amazing, but even this is stretching his power of deduction. How do my wrists tell you that? They don't, but I know for a fact that Kunikita and Dazai would have been just driving down the street when you called me, and I don't see them anywhere around here, and you haven't once mentioned them or made any move to check your phone, despite being on an active case. I think you abandoned them in order to have this conversation. But what in the world would make Atsushi, the most loyal and kind-hearted of all of us, run from his masters and responsibility of a case? Atsushi shrugs weakly. Rampo holds up a single finger. If you, 1, already knew what was going to happen and they would be safe, he raises a second finger. Or if you, 2, didn't know, but had some sort of reassurance there would be no serious risk. A bit of both, he murmurs, shoulders slumping in exhaustion. The exhaustion is a dead giveaway. I think you've been living more days than the rest of us. Usually just extra hours, but they tend to add up. Something flashes across Rampo's face he doesn't quite recognize, but it's gone before he can try to decipher it. Tell me everything from the beginning. A time loop, Rampo explains, an hour and several parfaits later. You're stuck in a time loop. And this is the first time you've told me? First time I've told anyone, he sighs, staring down at the water in front of him. He hasn't felt hungry in days, or weeks, it turns out, from Rampo's estimation. He says he's most likely been stuck in this for a little under 2 months. Why? Rampo's questions generally range from the sarcastic to hysterical, so to hear him asking something so sincerely takes him back a bit. I thought I knew enough to get out of it on my own, and how exactly was I supposed to explain it and have people believe me? By people, you mean Dazai and Kunikita. Rampo frowns. I suppose. I just find it a bit surprising. You aren't one to shy away from using the strength of a team to tackle a problem, and they've been there in front for you, each time. He pauses, glancing back to Atsushi. You're ashamed of what happened in the first loop. If I can get this right, no one will remember it at all, so that's one positive thing. You do realize no one will hold it against you, right? Dazai and Kunikita were worried for you, not upset at you. They should be able to rely on me, not have me being the cause of a gunfight in what was supposed to be a milk run. His chest heaves at the outburst and he flushes, sinking back against the seat. He's all words and no action, unable to find a way to get out of the time loop, let alone prove himself to Dazai and Kunikita. Well, Rampo drawls, then let's get you out of here. Atsushi can only nod, unable to remember the last time he'd heard words so sweet. He trusts Rampo. If anyone can get him out of this mess, it's him. His ability is called Death Comes for the Archbishop, and it's marked you with deep bruises that seem to be an invisible binding of some sort. You reset the loop every time you are badly injured or break the tablet? I don't know about the slab breaking. The time that happened, the woman in the kimono killed me. You said you appeared back in the car before she hit you, that you never once felt the hit, correct? Atsushi considers the memory. Yeah, I guess I never felt it actually touch me. You need to be sure on the details. That's an important key to this. Rampo rubs his chin in consideration, and that look is back on his face. The one Atsushi can't for the life of him place or remember ever seeing before. Atsushi. He blinks, meeting Rampo's eyes across the table. I've never done a case before where I've been unable to follow through with the results. If I tell you my deductions, that is all they will ever be for me. Simple guesses, very carefully considered ones, with as much proof as one can gather from your account of the loops and my ability, but they're still just guesses. I am almost 99% certain on the outcome of this, but that doesn't make that 1% chance any less real. Atsushi frowns. I trust you, Rampo. But if I'm wrong about this, I'll forget this conversation and never know I was the one who told you to try. Try what? What do you think I need to do to break the loop? Rampo takes a deep breath, the darkness behind his gaze retreating somewhat as the facade of the detective slips back into place. I believe the time loop is a defense mechanism, not some kind of curse ability. The ability itself binds the victim into the loop to allow them to accomplish certain tasks no matter how long it may take. Your assignment is to protect the tablet like the boy requested, but that's simply the job. In order to actually break the loop, you need some sort of password to signify you're ready to leave. The bruising on your wrists is what's binding you here, and after your injury, they started to react, a warning to the victim that you're about to be pulled out. But I wasn't pulled out, I just woke up at the start of the loop. Correct, because if you suffer a fatal injury, you've most likely failed the task and need to start again. Death, however, would be very unlikely to be drawn out if it was by your own hand. So you're saying the only way to leave the time loop is by ending your life, signifying the completion of the mission. I'm sure there's something poetic there about giving your life to the cause or some nonsense. Sounds to me like there's a built-in time limit to make sure you actually mean to leave the loop, and that's why the healing abilities of your gift have prevented you from exiting. I would wager it's most likely around 2 minutes. Atsushi stares for a long moment, taking that in. That's it? I just have to die and I'll be let go? You'll exit the loop. Sounds fairly simple, but remember the time limit. Your ability is going to be working against you here. I almost die all the time. He laughs, a weight in his chest lifting. I'm going to get out of here. Atsushi, Rampo reminds him seriously. You're going to need to be methodical about this. It's not going to be easy with Kunikita and Dazai over your shoulder. Practically impossible, actually. They're not going to let you go. Atsushi is barely listening, though, too caught up in the feeling of hope that he thought has long since left him. His entire life, people have been telling him he'd be better off dead, and it's not like he doesn't consider the possibility of whose lives would be more important. If he just disappeared, everyone. He's prepared for this. He hugs Rampo tightly when it's time to go. He won't even remember this, so what's the harm? But to his surprise, the detective wraps an arm around his back and gives him a firm squeeze. You need to survive this, he says seriously. That look once again heavy in his gaze, and if Atsushi didn't know any better, he'd want to call it fear. It's gone as fast as it came, though. A sly smirk back in place as he claps him once on the back. You'll need to give future me a play-by-play on everything I just told you, and how perfectly I predicted it. Okay, I'll remember, he promises with a grin. Oh, and Atsushi, Rampo says as he pulls back on his hat. Try trusting us. Atsushi learns what Rampo meant about it not being very easy quickly during his next loop. He's excited, practically drunk on the thrill of getting to go to sleep in his own bed and actually wake up in it. Getting to see Kyoka sleepily fumbling around with her cereal and walking to work with Naomi and Junichiro. His normal, boring routine now something he wishes for so desperately it actually hurts. He decides to play it safe and keep the slabs in the warehouse, making quick work of them with his now preferred method. It just takes moments at this point to swap them out in a crate filled with exotic animal pelts and push the original crate back onto the shelf. The shock foam filled with large porcelain platters he once shattered to conceal something that had been taken. He returns to Dazai and Kunikita just in time for the woman in the kimono to start getting antsy with the lack of results. It's the same story every time. She can't find them, she yells at her men for several minutes. The men find the 3 of them instead of the slabs, and regardless of the slabs or not, all hell breaks loose in a gunfight Kunikita flash grenades them out of, with Dazai picking out anyone who manages to aim their gun in their direction. It's a solid plan, one that's worked very well every time, with no one physically worse for wear. It's so predictable that Atsushi knows exactly what's coming when the 3 of them rush forward to the next crate for cover. A bullet always zips over his shoulder, the sound making his ears ring and his head duck on instinct. But instead of keeping low, he raises his head higher. The fight may be predictable at this point, but Kunikita is not. Sometimes Atsushi forgets just how honed the man's instincts are, because never before has he even glanced Atsushi's way as they make their way over to the crates, but as soon as he shifts upward, Kunikita's eyes are on him. He hears the telltale zip, but Kunikita's faster, pushing his body into Atsushi so fast he nearly gets whiplash, smacking down onto the concrete hard enough to make him see stars. He's wet. There's something wet on his face, and it's only getting wetter. Hot and sticky, and the air suddenly has that sickly metallic smell to it. Kunikita! Dazai, except it doesn't sound like Dazai, because Dazai doesn't scream like that. Doesn't sound like his words are being forced out of his throat like a dying breath. Atsushi can't make sense of the strangeness. he doesn't want to. But he has no choice because Kunikita shifts, rolling off of him and to the side, and now he can see the crimson staining both of them and pooling damp and sticky on the floor. Everything rushes back into focus, and now Atsushi's the one who's screaming as he presses his hand desperately against Kunikita's neck to try to stop the bleeding, the bullet having ripped its way through the artery. He hears gunfire, but doesn't care. Kunikita's hand is cold. Warm. It's supposed to be warm. It's always warm when it weakly reaches up to press against his. "You all right, kid?" Atsushi is not. "Why would you?" He breaks off, tears falling down his face, and he can't stop these any more than he can stop his own damn loop. "I'm not worth this." He's angry, he realizes. He's so very angry because Kunikita's worth 1,000 Atsushis, and Atsushi should be taking bullets for him, not the other way around. "Kid," Kunikita repeats, and Atsushi has no right to feel this warm or this comforted or whatever this burning in his chest is that threatens to overtake him at the weight and meaning behind that word. The gunshots seem louder now, and he abruptly realizes they're out in the open, having never made it to proper cover because of Atsushi's death wish. Neither of them have any extra bullet holes though, and he only now notices there seems to be a lot more blood pooling on the ground than just one man can produce. Dazai stands over the woman in the white kimono, her power nullified, and doesn't give her a moment to speak before putting a bullet between her eyes. The ground is littered with corpses, all of them gunned down with the intent to kill, and while Atsushi knows Dazai was a member of the Port Mafia, actually seeing their signature style in motion is another thing entirely. Dazai is there then. The warehouse is empty of anything living except the three of them. "Dazai," Kunikita scolds, managing to sound harsh even with his voice barely more than a whisper. "Don't." Dazai grips onto Kunikita's free hand, his other going to the collar of his vest and yanking slightly. "You don't get to do this, not you too." Atsushi looks down at the ground, intruding on something very private, and as much as Kunikita has been kind, he's too much of a coward to meet Dazai's gaze. He already knows what he'll find there, and he doesn't know if he'll be able to survive that kind of complete rejection. Kunikita's hand goes limp at the same time Dazai starts trembling, leaning down on his arms against his partner's chest, as if the pressure can wake the dead. "I'm so sorry," Atsushi manages to get out, his voice raw from both the screams and tears. "It should have been me. I wish it was me." He's not talking about the time loop. Dazai's trembling stops, and he sits back up on his knees before reaching out and grabbing Atsushi's chin roughly, his grip bruising as he turns his face up from the ground to meet his black eyes. "Don't you dare say that," he hisses. A sob breaks through his chest, and all he can do is nod weakly, ashamed at even daring to compare his own death to something like this. Dazai turns back to the body, and Atsushi runs. He doesn't dare try and even injure himself in order to restart the loop, not willing to take the chance of it actually freeing him, and this loop being the hell he's stuck living inside of. He curls up in an alley, in some strange part of town he's never been to, and tries not to think about the news the rest of the agency is receiving right now. Atsushi opens his eyes to the back seat of Kunikita's car with both him and Dazai arguing in front of him, and promptly lets out a sob before scrambling for the door and managing to get half his body out just in time to vomit all over the sparkling white tiles. Yosuno has a name for when Kunikita and Dazai get like this. She calls it playing house. "Look," she'd coo if she were here. "It's Mommy." She'd wrap her arm around Kunikita. "And Daddy." Then an arm around Dazai. "And Baby." And end it with a kiss to Atsushi's forehead. Kunikita had pulled the car off as soon as he'd managed to stop spitting at his lunch. Lunch he can't even remember eating anymore, and now he's settled on a bench by some sort of massive water feature, with Dazai fussing over his face and hair while Kunikita looks up drugstores on his phone. "He's hot," Dazai tuts, pressing a cool hand against his forehead, and the touch is so welcome against the black gaze that still burns into him when he closes his eyes that he can't help but lean into the touch. "We have a case," he argues, because as much as going back to the warehouse is the last thing he wants to do right now, he doesn't want them to think he's trying to drag them away from a job. "We're just snagging an antique. It'll still be there in a few hours," Kunikita says idly, brow furrowed as he reads over the Yelp reviews for different drugstores. The slabs will be long gone in a few hours, but after everything, he can't bring himself to try to push them back into the warehouse when Dazai is humoring him with his touch, and Kunikita's voice is soothing and familiar and very much alive as he hovers nearby. They're already 10 minutes off schedule, and knowing Kunikita, he's most likely reworked a complete new timeline for them to adhere to. Anti-nausea and something for the fever. Maybe a juice too. He'll need to rehydrate. Kunikita mumbles as Dazai leans over to inspect the options. "I'm hungry too. Maybe you should bring us all something to eat." Dazai points at a little sandwich shop next to one of the drugstores. "Please, Kunikita?" "I'm going to get medical supplies. Don't leave him on his own," Kunikita says instead, pressing a pointed finger against Dazai's chest that has him gasping in betrayal. Atsushi watches his long strides as he disappears down the street, unable to shake away the sight of blood pooling and cold hands that flash across his mind. "Are you cold?" Dazai frowns, a hand pressing down on his shoulder, and he realizes he's trembling. He shakes his head, thinking back to the heavy gaze Kunikita had pinned him with and the soft "kid" that had been his last words to him. No one has ever told Atsushi they love him before, but even someone as unfamiliar with the emotion as he is can feel the meaning behind that word. He doesn't quite know what to do with the information, unable to even fathom that Kunikita could possibly feel that way about him. A useless orphan rat. That still doesn't stop the warm, bubbly feeling in his chest. A weight is suddenly on his shoulders, and he glances up from the ground to see the familiar tan trench coat now wrapped around him. "Seriously, how long have you been sick?" I haven't felt well since the car ride," he murmurs, as honest as he can be. "You need to say something. We aren't going to drag you into a case when you look like you might drop at any moment." Dazai frowns, eyes lingering on the dark circles Atsushi knows are under his eyes, and the slack paleness to his face. "I'm just tired. Looks worse than it is." Dazai comments, face unreadable. "Did something happen with Kunikita?" His heart jumps into his throat. "What? Why would you? No." Dazai grins slyly. "So something did happen then? You keep looking at him like he might up and disappear." Atsushi shrugs, eyes dropping back to the ground. "You may not want to talk about it, but I wouldn't recommend letting whatever it is fester," Dazai says casually. When Atsushi sneaks a glance, he's leaning back on his hands, eyes up towards the sky. "Kunikita is a very good listener, if you can manage to get him to shut up." What the hell is that supposed to mean?" Kunikita asks, dropping down on the bench on the other side of Atsushi and pressing a sports drink into his hands. "Exactly what I said. I meant it as a compliment. You impress me even with how many sentences you can get out between breaths." And here I thought I might be generous. Kunikita pulls out a sandwich from his bag, and Dazai's eyes widen in joy. "Kunikita, you angel!" he sings, a hand pressed against his chest. Kunikita scoffs and tosses the sandwich over to him, Dazai catching it and ravenously unwrapping the paper and taking a large bite, moaning happily. "So good!" "Here, kid." The sandwich is pressed into his hands along with the bottle of pain reliever. "Try and eat some of this first, then take the pill. I'd rather we didn't have a repeat of earlier if you start feeling nauseous again." His tone is firm, but the hand that moves to the rest of his back is affectionate. He wonders how much of the conversation Kunikita had heard. He will get out of here, even if just so he can continue having moments like these with the three of them, that might just someday burn away the image of Kunikita's bloody body and Dazai's broken stare. He's not going to risk Kunakita again, so getting shot in the warehouse is out of the question. He decides to widen his gaze slightly, just to be safe. He still needs to go to the warehouse because regardless of Rampo's theory, he still has a job to do. As a member of the agency, he's going to make sure the slabs don't fall into the wrong hands. He does his now usual method of switching out the crates as quickly as possible before considering his options. There's a fire exit a few aisles down, and he manages to sneak past the few men already searching the shelves to make a break for the outside. The door opens to the train track side of the warehouse, but it's mostly quiet, no one around to hear the gunshots that will be flooding the air soon. While deserted, the train station is relatively close to town, and it's only half-a-mile walk until he's back around the bustle of people and shops. Luxury cars zoom past the roads as he walks, whipping his shirt around his stomach and earning a few curious stares from passers-by with how oddly he seems to be standing out. He ignores them, though, too focused on the task at hand. He considers his options as he walks. He refuses to hurt anyone else in the process of his death, and the idea of trying to get someone to help sits weirdly on his stomach. He knows how uncomfortable it makes people feel when Daza requests for their help, and he doesn't want to do that to anyone, even on the off chance they'll say yes. That narrows him down to deaths he can do himself, on top of them having to be strong enough to kill him. His healing ability is mostly unconscious, but perhaps with enough force he can will it not to activate? Stupid idea. He'll just need to find something that'll kill him quick. He stares around the quiet road, willing something relatively dangerous to appear. He doesn't really think of finding a way to die would be this frustrating, considering how regular an occurrence it has been this year. He can see a relatively tall bank in the distance, so he keeps walking, deciding he might have to be a little more traditional than he'd originally thought, since apparently everything in his life just has to be out of reach. No one so much as blinks at him when he walks through the lobby, his agency suit giving him the advantage of blending in with the rest of the businessmen and women despite his age. It's almost a bit sad how easy it is to slip past the security camera for the emergency stairwell. It's a 10-story climb, but he doesn't mind it, too preoccupied with his ability and if it'll stop him from leaving the loop once again. He doesn't always transform when in danger, and he's fallen quite a few times without his tiger making an appearance. He hopes if he keeps his mind clear, it'll be a quick drop to the bottom, and then what? He hasn't really thought about that part. He'll die, but then what happens? Does his body somehow heal itself and he gets to walk away? Does the loop restart for the final time? Does the loop break, but he stays dead? He grips tighter to the hand railing, but even if death is the only thing waiting for him, he'd rather that than being forced to live this nightmare on repeat. He's not going to trap his family in an infinity of repeats they can't remember just because he's too afraid to take the fall. Literally. The door to the roof only has a bolt lock, which he snaps easily, pushing it open and almost blinded by the evening sunset reflecting off the ocean. It's stunning, and he can't help but think that it's not a bad thing to see right before jumping. There's a slight edge to the roof, but nothing to prevent him from doing the job, and he quickly scrambles up onto it. He doesn't bother with taking off his shoes since he is hoping to be able to walk out of this after the fall. It's a stunning view, the shop district seeming almost on fire from the reflection of the sun off the white buildings. He can see the train warehouse in the distance, and he hopes Kunakita and Daza are doing okay, which is dumb. Of course they are. It's not like he's there to mess it up. Atsushi takes a deep breath and steps off the ledge. He doesn't focus on the fall, not wanting to instinctively transform out of fear. Instead, he forces himself to think of the agency, his family, to think of Daza and Kunakita alive and arguing with everyone back at the office and the slab safe, and maybe himself getting to walk through the door after breaking the loop. He's concentrating so hard that it takes him several seconds to realize he's not falling anymore. He hasn't hit the ground either, the sidewalk looking perfect and very much not splattered with the body from where he's floating less than a foot away from it. Floating. He's getting a sickening feeling in his stomach, glancing around the crowd that's now gasping and pointing at him. And sure enough, there's a familiar mafioso across the street, looking absolutely livid. As soon as their eyes meet, the force holding him up, gravity, he supposes, lets him down, and he tumbles to the sidewalk in a heap. "Are you okay? Hey, sir, can you hear me? Someone call an ambulance!" There are voices and a few hands touching him, but Atsushi ignores them, not knowing whether to be embarrassed or angry that his jump has failed, but he hides his face all the same. "Out of the way, move!" A familiar voice this time, followed by a gloved hand yanking him up off the sidewalk and quickly down the street before tossing him roughly into an alleyway. "So," Chuya says, his casual tone forced judging by the razor-sharp edge to his mouth. "You're Dazai's kid, right? You want to tell me why the fuck I just watched you jump off that building?" Atsushi has only had a few run-ins with Chuya. It would be impossible not to with Dazai as his mentor, but he's been under the impression his presence is mostly a shadow compared to the explosive way the two of them go at each other. Chuya hates the agency, and their brief meetings would have made it clear that Atsushi is nothing more than an extension of that. So, that of course begs the question. "Why'd you stop me?" Chuya scoffs. "You seriously want to die? You take after that asshole so much you want to copy his suicides?" "This has nothing to do with Dazai. You shouldn't have stopped me." "Oh yeah, and I should just watch you splatter on the sidewalk like a blood bag and then gone along with my day?" He shoves a finger into Atsushi's chest. "You that fucking selfish? You think I want to see that?" Atsushi grits his teeth and drops his gaze, shrugging his shoulders. He might make a comment about the Port Mafia's past with him, but the tentative ceasefire between both sides has made any Mafia members besides Akutagawa attempting to kill him a rarity, and certainly never on official orders. He's also always liked Chuya, and the no-nonsense way he handles Dazai and assignments from what he's seen, and it feels unfair to challenge that. Yes, he'd like to see an acquaintance kill himself. "No, I'm sorry," he apologizes, and it feels weak to his own ears. Chuya sighs, and obviously agreeing, and probably ready to get back to whatever Port Mafia business had him wandering around this part of the city. "I'm calling Dazai." "Wait, what?" Atsushi gapes, staring up at the man from where he's still sprawled on the ground. "No, please, Chuya, he doesn't need to be involved in this." She ignores him, turning away to lean against the brick wall. At this point, it's been over a few hours since he left the warehouse, but maybe Dazai is too busy to answer and he'll be spared the humiliation. "Hey, it's me." Chuya huffs into the phone. Atsushi lets his head thunk back against the dumpster in defeat. "What the hell are you so busy doing?" "I don't fucking care. Listen, I found your little ward, or whatever you call him, about to make himself into a pancake in front of the central bank building." There's a pause. Chuya's eyes flicking over to him, but the anger now seems to be replaced with confusion. "I don't know. I was in the middle of a job when I saw him standing on the ledge. How long's he been missing?" Guilt burns on Atsushi's cheeks, and he curls in on himself, embarrassed to have made this much of a nuisance of himself to involve both the agency and the Port Mafia. He pushes himself back against the dumpster. The sharp sting of glass pinches against his legs. He winces and looks down, shards of amber glass and half a broken beer bottle littering the ground. Chuya is frowning at the phone, too focused on whatever Dazai is telling him, and his gaze is somewhere on the road. "Nah, I have him. We're across the post office on 5th Street. How long till you'll be here?" Atsushi doesn't even think. He just takes the bottle and stabs the sharp edge into his side, forcing his mouth to stay closed and his gaze to remain steady in case Chuya looks his way. He won't die in time to break the loop, but he'd rather not have to try and stumble his way through an excuse as to why he abandoned Dazai and Kunikita mid-case to try and jump off a bank. He drops the bottle, and it rolls under the dumpster. Adjusting his shirt to hide the wound and laying his hands on his lap as Chuya looks back over his way. He takes him in for a moment, and Atsushi's sure he'd been figured out when Chuya moves the phone away from his mouth. "You want to talk to him?" He shakes his head. Chuya nods and presses it back to his mouth. "Hurry it up, asshole," he says as goodbye, flipping the phone shut. There's a long moment of silence. Atsushi is expecting Chuya to go keep watch at the mouth of the alley. Instead, he gracefully sits down next to him. The surprise must show on his face because Chuya shrugs and leans his arms down back behind him. Dazai says he thought you'd been snatched. How the hell did you end up here if you were in the middle of a job? I walked. Chuya raises an eyebrow, taking that in before sighing. Look, kid, Atsushi, right? I'm not an expert in this kind of shit, but maybe you should talk to Dazai. No good will ever come from what you're trying to do. I'll try, he says, because what else is he supposed to do? Explain that hopefully a whole lot of good will come if he can manage to kill himself? Chuya is reaching out to him with kindness as Atsushi is confused as he is touched. Anyway, I'm sure Dazai will have a lot more to say on that, hypocrite that he is, so I don't want to nag you. Just listen to the people that care about you, okay? Atsushi nods, and a silence stretches between them, just a few minutes too long to be comfortable. The backside of his shirt is now soaked in blood. So... Chuya runs a finger over the bridge of his hat. I hear you like to cook? Atsushi blinks in surprise, nodding slightly. Yeah, well, it's more like trying to cook. I'm not very good at it, or anything, but I used to barely know how to work a rice cooker, so I've been trying to learn some basic stuff. He'd been planning on trying to do a pork cutlet for his bento tomorrow, that meat having been on sale at the supermarket. Now it's just been sitting in his fridge. Over 2 months old, but still continuously fresh with each loop. Will he ever get to cook it? I saw a picture of that onigiri you made. That looked pretty good. He must be staring because Chuya clears his throat again. Dazai sent me some pictures. He was real proud. No idea why he sent them to me of all people, but yeah, they looked halfway decent. Atsushi had made so many rice balls that night and had taken in a dozen of the best for inspection at work the next morning, letting the office gather around to see his work. Dazai had praised the entire collection and took several photos on his phone, even having Atsushi pose with his lunchbox in his hands. It was completely embarrassing, even if he'd been nearly glowing with pride the rest of the day. Chuya must have been the recipient, and Atsushi felt his face heat. Sorry, he can get a little carried away sometimes. He apologizes. And is it just him, or are his words slurring slightly? Chuya doesn't seem to notice. Like I said, they were decent. If that bastard is going to send me pictures, at least it's gotta be of stuff worth looking at. Atsushi smiles, but his mouth feels heavy. Thanks, Chuya, for talking to me. Well, yeah, that's... Whoa, kid, you don't look so good. He can feel hands on his shoulders, then fingers searching for a pulse, but his vision is already growing dark. Kid, Atsushi, hey, Dazai's gonna be here real soon. You need to hang on. Atsushi walks in the opposite direction when he sneaks out of the emergency exit this time. Chuya had been an unexpected surprise, and he'd rather limit the risk of the mafioso finding him a second time, since his loyalty to Dazai apparently still has enough strings attached to save his mentee. That, and Atsushi is a bit surprised to hear just how much Dazai shares about him, or that Chuya even chooses to remember. Wanting to avoid any potential roadblocks, he decides to head for the docks instead of the city, figuring there might be a quick death somewhere in the heavy machinery and poorly secured shipping containers. It's about as empty as the one across town near the agency. Barely any workers to navigate around as he makes his way in and out of the containers. He's searching through a few leftover tool chests for something sharp when he hears it. Where, Tiger? You have got to be kidding me, Atsushi murmurs under his breath. Dazai had said something about doing business here in the past, but did that really mean the entire port mafia was in this corner of Yokohama all at once? You're a long way from home. This part of the city doesn't cater to penniless detectives. I'm here on a job, he huffs, dumping the tool chest out on the ground, but nothing looks particularly promising. So do me a favor and go away. You're on Port Mafia turf, actually, and it's my duty to take care of intruders. A flash of black cuts across his cheek. blood dripping down his face as Rashomon hovers in the air next to his head in a clear threat. This dance with Akutagawa is as familiar as breathing, the two constantly at odds no matter what the current relationship of their respective organizations. The crackle of power between them is as addicting as it is destructive, and Atsushi can't stop being drawn to the man like a moth to a wildfire. His body moves out of habit, leaping forward to miss the next cutting blade that cracks into the concrete where he previously stood. "Come on, were-tiger. I thought you had grown stronger," Akutagawa calls. Another attack of razor-sharp blades, and he's forced to move closer to miss, twisting his body and launching toward Akutagawa, whose eyes brighten with the thrill of the fight. They crash into each other, a flutter of limbs as his strength pulses against the armored arm Akutagawa used to knock him off balance. Rashomon nearly bites off his leg when he breaks free of the grip, and it's only then he realizes his best chance of escaping the loop might have come to him. Rashomon rises up and, predictably, curls straight for his arms, a familiar move meant to pin him to the ground. Instead, Atsushi twists and lets the blade cut clean through his chest. He screams. It's one thing to be stabbed, but an entirely different situation to be impaled. 4 perfect spikes are embedded into his torso, and he can vaguely see his chest trembling as he tries to take in air. Pain rakes insistent, an icy crawl up his spine, making his vision blur and limbs weak. All he can feel is the beat of his pulse around each gaping wound. Atsushi! He doesn't recognize the voice at first, because he's never heard it say his name before. He blinks through the hot tears, and not even ashamed at crying because at this point he just wants to be dead. Akutagawa is holding him upright, hands trembling where they dig into his skin, staring wide-eyed at his chest. "You idiot! What the hell was that?" Fingers are prodding at his skin, which is ridiculous because what's Akutagawa going to do? Triage him? Even from a glance, he can tell at least 2 of the spikes are through his lungs. And as long as he doesn't force a transformation, there's no way he'll be able to heal fast enough to survive. "You always dodge to the left, always. I knew you saw that coming. Why didn't you dodge?" Akutagawa was mumbling, his hands cool as they expertly touch over his chest. "I can't remove Rashomon without you bleeding out on me. They'll have to stay in for now." Atsushi coughs blood in response, and grins a little at the irony. Akutagawa's face sets into something dark, and Atsushi's pretty sure this is what his victims feel like before they die. But then he reaches down and rips a strip from his perfectly pressed shirt, and Atsushi is obviously hallucinating. Except maybe not, because there's a steady pressure against the widest of the wounds, hands helping stem the bleeding, and Atsushi can't help but feel betrayed. Out of everyone who could have helped him in this, he'd trusted Akutagawa to finish the job. "I don't like sparring with people with a death wish, were-tiger," Akutagawa hisses, hands pressing punishingly deep on his chest. "And I can't help but feel you walk straight onto my blade." Is he really this predictable? Regardless, I hope you are well aware that no one dies by my hand unless I say so. And I know I have given you no such permission. You are not allowed to die, Atsushi, Akutagawa growls. He seems to be right, because even through the haze of pain, Atsushi can see the soft glow of his ability beginning to heal the wounds, as if Akutagawa's anger had simply willed it into existence, despite all of his stubborn planning. "No," he chokes raggedly, words difficult around the blood in his mouth and the small amount of air he can even gasp. "Don't, Akutagawa, please." "Please?" Akutagawa snarls. "Please what? Please allow you to die? I will do no such thing. When I finally kill you, it will be a triumph of my superiority, not you giving up on me." Atsushi thinks that's a pretty significant requirement for his death, considering how often Akutagawa tries to fight him, but the tug on his wrists is now too strong to feel anything but disappointment. Atsushi is used to a world halting him, but now, even his supposed rival is trying to force his survival. Of course, it's when he needs death that it evades him. He's getting desperate now. Leaving the warehouse seems stupid, considering he's gotten caught by the two least likely people to help him. Who knows who else might show up at this point. Instead, he focuses on the agency when they return with the slabs, but even that ends disastrously. Yoshino walks in on him, downing an impressively sour cocktail of nearly all 3 medications he could get his hands on in her cabinets. Her ability is activated before he can even get out an excuse, and spends the next 5 minutes guiltily letting her hug him as she quietly explains her own struggles with mental health and how they'll help him through this, and God, Atsushi, what would we even do if you left us? Junichiro jumps in right after him when he tries to drown himself at the docks. Naomi holding his hand so tightly when he's dragged out like a wet dog, he knows it would bruise the next morning if those existed for him anymore. Junichiro cries when he untangles the remains of the wire wrapped around his leg he'd used to attach the cinder block to hold him down. Kenji tackles him to the road and covers his body when he walks into oncoming traffic. Kyoka sees something in his face when he gets home in the evenings, hugging him tight without saying anything. Hell, even Katai sends him a text message once asking him why he's Googling suicide methods, and that he's already texted Kunakita who's on his way over. Rampo catches him trying to shoot himself before he's even able to pick up a weapon. He's eyeing Dase's gun he's left haphazardly on his desk for less than half a second when the detective walks over, picks up the gun, and pointedly pockets it, giving Atsushi an unimpressed stare. Let's go talk to the president. There's nothing for Atsushi to stab himself with this time, so he's forced to go and sit in the president's office, while Rampo gives him a brief explanation of what he'd caught him doing. And it's all so irritating considering Rampo was the one to even tell him to do this. Atsushi, the president says softly, and somehow he'd missed when the man had walked out from behind the desk since he's now kneeling in front of him, looking so serious and concerned and not mad at all. I'm sorry, he says, because that's all he's been saying lately, and he really means it, he just doesn't really know what for yet. Let us help you, the president says, soft and firm, like he's stating a fact instead of offering a hand. Like Atsushi will always have their help, regardless of whether he asks for it or not, and that goes against nearly everything he's ever been taught, though, after the past few weeks of the agency always stopping him from walking over the edge, a small part of him can't help but think that maybe he's telling the truth. Maybe he's not nearly as useless to them as he'd believed if they're dead set on saving him. Shiryoku, Dase announces, just as passionately as he has every day for the past, what are they on now? Month 4? Man, this place never changes. Did I ever tell you I've been kicked out of most of the bars around here? Dase, he interrupts. Do you have a pair of handcuffs on you? Kinky, Atsushi, but I've already told you. I'm not interested in anyone who's not willing to plunge into the abyss with me. He laughs a bit too long for what's not even really a joke to the two of them, but it doesn't matter. He's hoping to break the loop today, and then he can tell them. Well, I heard about this old folktale, and I thought you might want to try it, he lies, bullshit dripping off his tongue. He's not usually that great at making up stories on the spot like this, but he's got infinite tries in case this one doesn't take. Involving handcuffs? Yeah, well, I think it's rope in the story, but basically, two people who desperately want something tie their hands together. And then, the desperation from one supposedly transfers to the other, giving them good luck or whatever they're trying to accomplish. He grins, hoping to cover up the desperation in his eyes. If you have the most pure intentions, then you get all the luck. I suppose a bit of luck would be useful, considering how unlucky my other attempts have been. I've never heard of this tale before. Who told you about it? Naomi. She said she'd heard it's used to increase your romantic chances, but it can go with other things too. I'm kind of hoping for something to happen, but I haven't been very lucky so far. And you're the luckiest person I know, so I thought you'd be the best person to ask. The nerves in his voice make it shake, and he hopes it helps his flimsy excuse to sound somewhat normal. Daze laughs, lounging back in his seat. We can try it when we get back to the agency. Well, I was hoping we could. We're on a job, Atsushi. Going in one-handed, even on a milk run, is asking for trouble. We might need those tiger arms in a moment's notice, Daze explains, with a wink, before leaning forward to fiddle with the radio station. Atsushi searches for a knife in the agency bag. Can I see your handcuffs? He asks Daze, snatching them out of his hands before the man can ask why. He recites the same story again, giving Daze the same pleading tale of good luck, only this time he doesn't ask before wrapping the chain once around both his wrists and cuffing them together. Atsushi, we're on a job, Daze laughs, holding up their chained hands and dragging Atsushi's arm up with him. I know, but more time for the luck to sink in, right? I kind of need it for today. Plus, Kunigita said we could, he explains, playing his trump card. I did not say that, you brat. Do not put words in my mouth. It's completely childish for you two to walk around the warehouse with your hands chained together like a 2-bit magic trick, he growls, hands tightening around the wheel. Daze's eyes widen dramatically, and he grips Atsushi's arm. Kunigita, you wouldn't dare separate my darling Atsushi from me in his time of need. We're fated to go through this journey together. We're brothers in arms on this path of luck. Kunigita looks like he wants to bash his head into the wheel. We're trying to set a good example for the agency. You said yourself, this is a simple milk run. We can do it with both our arms tied. Come here, Atsushi. Daze reaches out like he's going to try to tie Atsushi to his other hand, which makes Kunigita start yelling even louder, much to Daze's delight. Atsushi just grins from the back seat, covertly eyeing where Daze sets the handcuff key in the cup holders between the seats. Getting out of the car is awkward, but it ends up working in his favor when he's forced to climb over the seats to get out of the front door, purposely brushing over the cup holders to make sure the key falls between the seats on his way out. He's wrapped the chain tight around both their wrists, nervous about being able to touch skin because of how high Daze's bandages went. Now, their hands and wrists press against each other as they walk, the cuff allowing no room for extra movement. Daze hasn't said anything, and Atsushi is just desperate to figure out a way to die before the end of the day. He doesn't particularly care what it feels like. He spent so much time trying to figure out how to get Daze in this situation, and now that he actually has a foolproof way to stop his healing, he's a bit hesitant. He isn't going to take any risks with Daze like Kunigita. They're both going to survive today. He tugs Daze down the proper aisle, the man having no choice but to follow him, even as he's shooting off suggestions on where to look first. Wow, he says when they come across the black crate sitting in the aisle. Looks like someone was in a hurry. Atsushi nods, doing his best to be someone seeing something so mysterious for the first time, and not like this damn crate has become the axis of his entire existence. Slabs are here. Daze frowns. Why would someone open this up and not take the artifact? Something else is going on here. He laughs weakly. Maybe they realize the slabs are a lot more trouble than they're worth. Maybe. I don't know if Kunigita told you, but there are rumors these things have some sort of supernatural ability. He reaches down and picks up one of the stones. They say they can create ripples in time. His eyes linger for a long moment on the engraving, before laughing and dropping it back into the crate. If you believe such things, of course. Come on, let's get them back to the car. Atsushi glares daggers at the stone slab Daze hands him to carry. Instead of meeting Kunigita hiding behind a crate, they find him being held at gunpoint, where they return to the entryway, Daze scowling as he presses Atsushi down behind it. Away, only to remember they're handcuffed together, and can't leave him there. Fuck, he swears, glaring at his wrist. This is going to be an issue, but there's no time for it. We need to distract them long enough for Kunigita to... Whatever Kunigita is going to do, Daze doesn't hear it, because the rest of the thieves turn the corner, and then they're being escorted to join them. I thought you knew the plan for something like this, Kunikida grumbles as they sit down next to him in the middle of the room. Handcuffs have definitely put a damper on my plan. Perhaps you were onto something about not wearing them, Dazai says pleasantly, as their captors hand the slabs to the woman in the white kimono. I thought we managed to beat you here, but perhaps that was a bit presumptuous of me. After all, I've heard quite the stories of the feats you people pull at the Armed Detective Agency. The woman smiles, all teeth as she delicately fans her face. You have us at a disadvantage, Dazai says pleasantly, in more ways than one. True, those handcuffs are an interesting battle tactic. However, I can't say I see the advantage. Wouldn't make much of a tactic if you could predict all of our movements. The woman laughs, and perhaps the cuffs put her at ease, or how easy they were to capture, but she seems genuinely entertained compared to their previous captures. I'll be honest, as a humble thieves guild, we have little use for such complicated matters. We generally deal in stealth, but I knew it would be a race against your agency, and was forced to come prepared with a bit more firepower. It's nice to hear we're so famous. I'm flattered you think so highly of us, or maybe fear is the better word. Dessa raises an eyebrow, and the woman's fan clacks hard against her hand. We do not fear anyone. I believe you misunderstand. Perhaps a better example of our methods will give you an idea of just what you've found yourself up against. She smiles darkly, her kimono once again starting to billow and shift back. Now, Kunikida calls, and Dazai grabs his cuffed hand to drag him to the nearest crate for cover as gunfire starts. This is familiar. Habit almost by this point with how many times he's been at this shootout. Except Dazai is chained to him now, and his balance is off-center, which is the only reason he can give for why he accidentally trips over his own feet, and face plants forward in the middle of their run for cover, pulling Dazai down with him. I'm sorry, he stutters, scrambling to get to his feet as Dazai pulls his gun out and picks off nearby thieves with his left hand. Even in the chaos, Atsushi can't help but be impressed with just how skilled his mentor is. He leans his body up to try and slowly stand together, but the hail of bullets interrupt him, turning his chest into Swiss cheese with a round of deafening shots. His white shirt is already soaked, blood dripping to the floor as he staggers, and it's a very different thing to plan your own death, opposed to actually stumbling into it. He's scared, for a freezing moment, the pain and the surprise overriding all other senses, and the terror must be plastered all over his face, because Dazai makes a strained sound and grabs him, pulling him roughly down against his chest. The arm pressing suffocatingly against him means safety, and his thoughts clear as he remembers that, he's been trying to get to this point for longer than he wants to remember. There's more gunfire, only this time it's followed by screaming and bodies hitting the ground rather than retreating, and he closes his eyes tight, refusing to remember the sight of Kunikida bleeding out when this happened last time. Atsushi, Dazai says, his hand tugging with increasing desperation against the handcuff. We need to get that cuff off you, you're bleeding out. His tone is calm, despite the ice in his eyes, as he takes out some of the stragglers before dropping his gaze down to where Atsushi is sprawled in his lap, head rolling on his shoulder. Keep your eyes open. Atsushi closes them. Kid. He feels a second pair of hands on him, Kunikida pressing from behind to shield him. Hands gently assessing the wounds on his chest, and honestly, if death is really permanent in order to break the loop, he can't think of another way he'd want to go than having Dazai and Kunikida by his side. He feels safe. Make another key, Dazai orders Kunikida. Another shot going off from somewhere to their left, and the dead weight of a body following soon after. Kunikida immediately digs into his jacket for his notebook before freezing, eyes wide as they meet Dazai's over Atsushi's head. I never saw it. There's a heavy tension in the air. We have a different set. I never saw your key, Kunikida says, eyes wide as he stares at Atsushi's bloody body in disbelief. I can't make a key. Dazai drops his gun. The warehouse once again is silent except for the three of them, and takes up Atsushi's cuffed hand to tug at the chain for weakness. I left it in the car, go. Kunikita is gone then, sprinting out of the warehouse, and Atsushi can only hope he doesn't make it back in time. Atsushi, you have to work with me here. Move your hand away from mine, Dazai says, voice strained with something desperate as he tries to move his hand against the cuff, far enough away to not touch any part of his skin. He's unsuccessful, though, because that has been the whole point. Hey! He blinks, Dazai's hands suddenly on his face, his own arm hanging limply next to his head as the older man grips him tightly, fingers brushing against his skin. You're not even fighting. I'm going to get you out of here, but I need you to fight for me, Atsushi. He's too tired. His body hurts. He hasn't felt pain like this since the orphanage. He wants this damned day to end. Atsushi, Dazai snarls. Everything good I've ever had has been taken from me, but if you think I'm going to lose you like this, you've got another thing coming. Fight, damn it. Atsushi can't, and Dazai must see it because his expression changes. Desperation morphing into acceptance as his grip tightens around his body. You're going to be fine, he says softly, with such certainty that Atsushi opens his eyes in confusion. Dazai pulls out the knife from inside his jacket, his face deceptively calm as he raises it high before swinging it down in one powerful slice. Blood spatters thick and warm across Atsushi's face, and his cuffed hand falls heavily into his lap. Atsushi screams as soon as he's back in the car again, scrubbing desperately at the phantom blood on his face. He can still feel the bloody stub of Dazai's dominant hand. Hands are on him again. They're warm and familiar, but he can't do this anymore. He passes out. He wakes up minutes later to his head being pillowed on Dazai's lap, who's sitting in the back seat with him and Kunikita on the phone with Yoshino as he takes his pulse. I'm fine, he mumbles weakly, but makes no move to get up. Kunikita flicks his ear and is silent. Shut up, brat, as he listens to whatever Yoshino is telling him. Gave us quite the scare, but people usually don't scream and pass out mid-conversation, you know. He nods tiredly, amusing Dazai's easy gaze, so different from the eyes he'd looked into just a moment before. Let us help you. The president's words are loud in his head, and he thought he was doing just that, recruiting Dazai in to cancel out his ability. But maybe he's just had it wrong this entire time. While Atsushi's tried to do everything on his own, the agency, and occasionally the mafia, have been there no matter what he tried. Maybe he's not as alone in this as he's always been told. Dazai cut off his hand for him. The least he can do is be honest back. I need to tell you guys something, he murmurs, when Kunikita hangs up the phone. He sits up slowly and turns so he can see both of them. Kunikita leaning against the seat from the driver's side, and Dazai in front of him on the back seat. Would that be why you're screaming and your pulse is so elevated? Kunikita asks. Atsushi nods and takes a deep breath, remembering protective hands and warm words drowning out the instinctive voice of the headmaster that no one will ever love him. He can do this. I'll at least try. I don't really know how to explain this, but I'm stuck in a time loop. He gets 2 blank looks back. I know it sounds crazy, but I've relived the same day more times than I can even count. The first time I got hit by some crazy ability when I found the slabs, and now I just keep repeating it over and over. Rampo says it's because I have to die, which is what I've been trying to do, but it's like the universe is out to get me, because for the first time in my life, that seems impossible. You've been trying to die? Kunikita stares at him, fingers digging into the car cushion. Atsushi, I don't know what kind of prank this is, but if Dazai's put you up to this— He hasn't, I swear. I can tell you everything that happens at the warehouse. Where the slabs are, the group that's going to come and try to steal them, how long the shootout will last if we get captured. Wait, what do you mean there's a group trying to steal the slabs? Dazai frowns. We have private intel on them being there. I don't know how they found out, they just barely say anything before we end up fighting. Alright, so you've been reliving the same day and doing this job on repeat, Dazai asks. Don't look at me like that, Kunikita. Way crazier things have happened to us all the time. Give him the benefit of the doubt. Kunikita doesn't look completely convinced, but nods with a sigh. Go on, Atsushi. Atsushi nods. Well, I always protect the slabs, but after that, I sort of just find a way to try and end it. That's my problem, though. I can't. You can't die? More like no one will let me. Every time I try, I'm interrupted by something or something horrible happens, so I thought if I told you... You thought we'd help you kill yourself. Dazai frowns, leaning back against the window as he considers it. Kunikita's face tightens, and he shakes his head. Absolutely not. This whole idea is ridiculous to begin with. Anyway, we're not going to let you die over some insane hallucination. Easy enough to prove if he's telling the truth, though. If we go to the warehouse and everything is like he says, then we'll know he really has lived through it. We don't know if dying is going to help him, though, Kunikita growls. I've died almost every time, don't worry about that, Atsushi waves off. I need to do it in under a time limit, though, because of my ability, and I can't quite make it under 2 minutes. Dazai and Kunikita stare at him for a moment, neither of them looking particularly comforted by that. Well, what have you done before? Dazai asks. What do you mean? He frowns. You want to know how I tried to die? No. I mean, what have the three of us done so we know what didn't work? Oh, he frowns. I never told you guys before. Dazai's mouth thins, and he's quiet for a long moment before turning back to Kunikita. Let's go then. We don't want to throw off when we arrive by too much, or else we won't be able to confirm the time loop. They make it to the warehouse in just enough time for Atsushi to show them the slabs exactly where he said they were. Black crate. It's halfway off the shelf and has a tarp thrown on top of it. There's a stack of porcelain plates right across the aisle. He tells them as they walk. A quick inspection confirms what he said, and then the thieves are moving in. I don't know a lot about them, just that the woman in the kimono is their leader, and she has some sort of offensive ability that she uses her clothes, he explains as they crouch behind the crate with the slabs. Usually, we just sneak out at this point. Sounds like a good plan to me. Dazai grins, and they make it out of the warehouse without any issue. It feels almost too easy, like this is a trick. But he forces himself to trust himself and the others that they'll be able to break this. So, Dazai says as he shuts the slabs in the trunk. We really are in a time loop then. What's the craziest thing that's happened? You cut off your own hand. The words are out before he can even stop them, and he winces. Kunikita glances over at Dazai from where he's sitting against the driver's door. I imagine your insanity knows no bounds in a situation like this. Aw, that's almost a compliment. He grins before turning back to Atsushi. Did the wannabe art thieves make me do it? No, he murmurs, following them into the car. I tricked you. Tricked me? You tricked Dazai. The two looked back at him in surprise before Dazai pouts and crosses his arms. You're abusing your time loop powers for evil if you tricked me into cutting off my limbs, Atsushi. We can't all just grow them back. I know, he murmurs, his voice thick as the car starts, and they pull away from the nightmare that was the warehouse. I kept getting saved before I could die, or my ability healed me too fast, and I was desperate. I tricked you into letting me handcuff us together. As soon as the words were out, realization flicks in Dazai's eyes. And then you tried to get yourself killed. Atsushi nods at his lap. Kunikita sighs heavily. It's hard for me to put something like your life on the line with so little information, but Dazai and I aren't going to let you live through something like that again. Do you understand, Atsushi? He says, meeting his gaze in the rearview mirror. His tone is scolding, but Atsushi can now recognize it for what it really is. He smiles weakly back. Yeah, I do. They end up parking the car by the docks, far enough away for no one to notice any strange noises, and Dazai sighs in relief when the car stops. Do you have a preference for this? He asks them awkwardly, having no idea how Dazai has the guts to just offer up a joint death with every random person he meets. Kunikita turns off the car and rubs his hand to his temple. I understand something is going on here, but do you really think this is the only option? It feels a bit extreme, considering our only proof is you confirming details about the job. Is that really enough to— We believe you. It's just a bit of a jump from accepting you've been reliving a day to then having to kill you to let you out, Dazai laughs, but his voice has an edge to it. So what will happen then? Kunikita asks. You die, and then you'll what? Will the day restart a final time? You'll wake up tomorrow? I don't know, he admits. I don't know that I will wake up. He watches Kunikita's fingers dent the seat. That's unacceptable. There's no need to leap to any conclusions if we don't have concrete proof yet, Dazai reasons. Tell us again tomorrow, and we can go talk to Rampo and see what he thinks. No. They both turn and look at him. I'm not doing this another day, he murmurs. I know it's scary to you, but you don't understand. Every single day for the past 4 months, I open my eyes in this car going the same place where the exact same thing happens. No matter what I try or what I do, I can't escape. And if I change anything, for better or for worse, everyone forgets. He looks up to meet both their gazes. But I remember. I remember every single thing that's happened, and it's killing me. If I'm stuck here any longer, I don't know how much of me is going to be left. Atsushi, you guys still don't get it. I've seen your dead body, Kunikita. I watched you take a bullet for me and bleed out in front of us. Dazai, you hated me for it. I've been stabbed and shot and impaled and everything you can think of, and it's never good enough. Even when I think I'm finally free of it, Dazai goes and cuts off his hand. I'm never going to be able to get out of here unless you guys help me. I'm not scared of dying because at least it would be something different. He huffs out a breath, fisting his hands in his lap as he does his best not to break down. You guys are stuck in this with me too. I'm just the one who remembers. Don't you want to see tomorrow? I'm not that personally invested if that means there'll be a casualty to get there, Dazai murmurs. Kunikita sighs, looking at Atsushi for a long moment. So you're willing to accept the high probability that you die and the world rights itself? Yes, he says without hesitation. Absolutely. This goes against everything I believe in, but I promised we're not going to let him suffer through this anymore, he murmurs to Dazai, whose gaze is stuck somewhere along Atsushi's shoulder. He nods minutely. Please, Atsushi begs, knowing if Dazai doesn't agree, Kunikita won't go through with it on his own. No one's ever begged me so nicely to kill them before. Dazai laughs darkly, but sits up, slipping off his tan trench coat and throwing it over the front seat. Come here, kid. He sighs in relief and moves forward to sit closer, but Dazai pulls him in, opening his legs so Dazai can sit between them, back pressed against Dazai's chest. Kunikita hesitates before stepping out of the car and coming around to the back, opening the front door and sliding into the seat across from them. I know this makes you uncomfortable. You don't have to watch, he says honestly, despite how much the idea of Kunikita leaving hurts. I'm not gonna leave you, brat, he grumbles, settling his long legs with one crossed on the seat and the other in the footwell. Dazai reaches up to his holster and pulls out his gun. The safety is still on as he passes it into Atsushi's hands. Don't ask us to do this part for you. No, of course not, he murmurs, staring down at the familiar gun. All of this time he's been so desperate to escape the loop, he's never really thought about the odds of him surviving or not. Either way, it's a relief, but now, with Dazai and Kunikita watching him expectantly, he can't help but wish, a little bittersweetly, that he gets to wake up. A hand brushes through his hair, then settles back around his waist. Daza's grip is almost punishing as he holds him tight against his chest. Kunikita seems conflicted before huffing out a sigh and reaching out to grip tightly to Atsushi's free hand. "We're going to see you tomorrow," he says firmly. Atsushi nods, even though he knows a goodbye when he sees one. He raises the gun up to his hand and flicks the safety off, pressing it into his hair. Daza tuts and gently guides his hand lower, the muzzle pressing cold against his temple. "You won't even feel a thing," he promises, his lips brushing against his hair. Kunikita's hand is trembling in his, despite the strong grip, and Daza's arms tighten even more, if that's possible. He watches the doubt grow in Kunikita's gaze and feels Daza take a deep breath as if to argue. He pulls the trigger. He blinks awake to the sound of birds chirping. The sunrise is filtering through the window, and its rays nearly blinding him as they fall across his face. "Morning," Yosuno greets in a whisper as she reaches down to check his pulse. He's about to ask if he's somehow lost his hearing when he catches the rest of the room. Daza and Kunikita lay asleep on chairs on either side of the hospital bed. Kyoka curled up on the top of the blanket at his side. Kenji has somehow made a bed for himself out of sheets on the floor, and Junichiro and Naomi are curled up on the second bed in the room. Even Rampo snores fast asleep in a chair leaned up against the window. The president was here too, but he had an early morning meeting. Your pulse was strong at that point, so I forced him out of here. Can't have the entire agency falling to pieces just because our favorite member is out of commission. She smiles, but Atsushi can see the deep bruising under her eyes from a too-late night. "What happened?" he asked quietly. "Daza and Kunikita rushed you to me yesterday evening with a self-inflicted bullet wound to the head. You flatlined and had called your time of death," she said softly, running a hand through Atsushi's hair. They explained what happened, about time loops and you being stuck in the middle of one. The president called the original owner the plates are being returned to, who explained the ability connected to them and that you were telling the truth. Apparently, there's no record of anyone coming out alive, though, she explains tensely. Then how? Let's just say we were pretty busy planning a funeral when you woke up and took a breath at midnight and about scared all of us half to death, she huffs. I have no clue how it works because you were very much dead, but none of us are going to question it too hard. Atsushi sighs in relief and leans back against the pillows. He'd done it. He'd broken the loop and made it to tomorrow. "Thanks, Yosuno," he murmured tiredly. "God, he just wants to sleep for a month. Don't thank me yet. You're going to have a lot of upset visitors to answer to. And since you're in perfect health for some mysterious reason, I have no medical issue with them attacking you." She winks. Family can be the worst. Atsushi stares out at the room filled with everyone he loves, his family, and he nods, grinning softly. He can't wait. Alright, FallenBrie. Not gonna lie, Atsushi, I didn't really care for Atsushi, but someone asked for an Atsushi fic, and so I was looking for them, and someone wrecked me this fic, and oh my gosh, Atsushi as a character has literally grown on me so much from this fanfic. Also, just to show how much I actually liked this fanfic, I originally planned to, record it in several sections, over a week, because it's 18k words and I'm a wimp and I don't want to record that long. But no, I started at 9 o'clock and here we are at 1 a.m. and I literally sat at my little desk area and recorded it for math. Edit, I'm back. It's 4 hours. I sat here and recorded it nonstop for 4 hours. Anyway, long story short, I love this fic so much. It has so much angst that, yeah. Anyway, love your fic. Bye. I mean, what have the three of us done so we know what didn't work? Oh, he frowns. I never told you guys before.